Welcome to AMP, the platform for age group multisport athletes to showcase their journeys. Welcome along to episode 51 of the Age Group Multisport podcast with me, your host, Richard Conway. So this episode's brought to you by Presca Sportswear. And if you listened to the last episode, episode 50, you would have heard me introduce this idea that we were going to be sponsored by Presca after Jamie Price, who was on episode 16, got back in touch and asked would we be interested in doing a collab with him. As he just joined the company, it would be a really good fit. So I asked him to send over some of their clothing. He sent me over some bib shorts, a cycling top and a jacket. And I've got to say, I usually wear Rafa, and these products are as good as Rafa, if not better, with the sustainability edge on it as well. So yeah, it was a no-brainer for me. Two birds, one stone. Helping out Jamie and promoting a British brand who's trying to do better by the planet. So it's a win-win. If you're interested and you need some new gear, running, cycling or triathlon, head over to their website, which is prescasportswear.com, and give them a look and read all about the sustainability elements of the brand. And also you can catch them on Instagram at Presca Sportswear. So our guest on episode 51 is Matt Barnes, and Matt chats to us about his humble beginnings swimming as a child, finding himself into the world of modern pentathlon, which you immediately think of as kids from a well-off background and horse-loving families. But this story is completely opposite, and it was just by chance that the swimming club had a biathlon part to it. Which gave Matt the opportunity to try the different sports. That being said, he still had to learn to ride, getting himself riding lessons. He then discusses his love of running and the injury that finally got him into multisport. He was already in multisport earlier on in his career, but multisport as we know it on this podcast, swim, bike, run. So yeah, lots to chat about. Fantastic journey, fantastic story. Lots of ups and downs, as usual. So that's coming up. I saw a post on Instagram from Verity Atk, an age grouper, and she was asking how people got hold of elastic bands for tying up the tri-shoes to the bike. And I've got to confess, and I confess to Verity, that I walked around the streets of Louth and picked up elastic bands that our local postman had discarded and rolled them up into a ball, much to the dismay of Mrs. C. But because we're now being promoted by a sustainable clothing brand, I thought it was only right and proper to help out in some small way I could. Well, that's my excuse anyway. I was doing it long before this episode, and I've got quite a collection in my kitchen drawer. So that's a great idea. So if you're if you're in town near a post office or on a postman's route, just look on the ground and you'll find loads of them. I got another message from Black Flag on Instagram, and he was asking, in my knowledge of GB Agegroup, had I ever heard of 3 members of the same family all qualifying in one season, because that's what they'd done. So it was himself, his dad and his brother had all got a slot this year. So he says that must be quite rare. And to be fair, I've not heard of that myself. I've seen and heard of a dad and a daughter, or a couple of brothers or sisters, or man and wife, but not 3 in one family. And he goes on to say he just needs his dad to keep chipping away for 11 more years until his daughter's 18, and then they can all race together. 3 generations, that would be something, wouldn't it? And I just heard this morning from Roz, who is one of our AMP Next Gen athletes, who was racing this weekend, trying to qualify for the standard aquathlon GB spot. And she did it. If you haven't heard any of Roz's story, please go back and have a listen. It's been full of ups and downs, and at one point she didn't know whether she was going to be able to race, but she turned up at the weekend, and yeah, she did it. She's qualified, and not only did she qualify in first spot in her age group, she was first woman overall. So congratulations, Ros. Hard work's paid off, and I look forward to speaking to you, and hopefully we can get another podcast out and you can tell us live all about it. Progress on my own route back to training and competition. Managed a full hour's swimming session last Monday. I've got another one tonight, and started group riding on a Friday evening, so that's been great. Really enjoyed getting out on the bike with the group, especially finishing in the pub at the end. Been building the running up slowly as well. Did some hill repeats last week and also a track session. So yeah, it's all coming along nicely. Might even do a local duathlon on Thursday with Mrs. C and some of my team WBC. And that's about it for this week on a catch-up. So on to our main event, and I'll see you on the other side.
Well, thank you ever so much for coming on. Why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I'm Matt Barnes. I'm an age group triathlete now, obviously. I've been not doing triathlon for that long. I'd say I've been competing probably in the sport of triathlon specifically for about 6 years. And probably the last year or two, I've probably been, I wouldn't say forced, but kind of evolved into taking it more seriously, because I was probably running was my main background over the sort of medium to long term past. That was my sort of main sport, but I was doing a little bit of triathlon sort of alongside that. So I'd say I was a serious runner, but playing around at a little bit of triathlon, because I'd done some cycling and I, as you'll probably find out, I did quite a lot of swimming when I was younger as well. Yeah. But I've had a slight issue with my hip over the last, actually the hip issue has been ongoing for about 5 or 6 years. I had an operation on it about 6 years ago. But in the last year or so, it's been sort of diagnosed as a bit more of a kind of long-term condition that I'm going to have to be quite mindful about the amount of running that I actually do, albeit I can still kind of compete and do some training, but just not at the level of that I was. So I'm probably actually, funnily enough, taking triathlon much more seriously now. Probably training, if I wanted to be a better triathlete, I'm probably training more how I should have been about 6 years ago. But because I'm no longer probably kind of competing at the level that I was with my running and able to do as much as that, I'm doing more on the swim and bike side. So that's actually probably helped my overall triathlon, because I probably lost. Sprint triathlon is my main distance, so I've probably lost 30-40 seconds off the run, but I've probably gained as much, if not a lot more than that, on the bike. So I'm probably a better triathlete now than I was a couple of years ago.
Yeah. I mean, the bikes, doesn't matter whether it's a sprint or a longer distance, the bike's the biggest component. So if you can get that sorted out and improve on that, you're gonna improve on the biggest component of the competition, aren't you? So,
yeah, I think so. And there's for me, there's certainly, because I've swum from a younger age as well, so I've always kind of swum. So I'm probably not gonna, if I can hold on to kind of the times that I'm doing in swimming and get maybe a second or two quicker, then that'll be a bit of a result. With running, it definitely is a case of maintaining the level that I'm at. But with the cycling, I think I've definitely got gains to make there, because I've not been in as sort of a cycling kind of training environment really until the last sort of year or two properly. I mean, I was doing a little bit of playing around, a couple of turbo sessions in amongst the running that I was doing, but it's become much more serious in the last kind of 18 months really.
So a lot more structured then.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Cool. So going back then to when you were a kid growing up, you just mentioned there that swimming was the thing.
Yeah, so swimming was probably the first thing that I started with. That was, went to the local swimming club, had lessons, ended up in the local swimming club. I was brought up in a town called Congleton. We had Dane Valley Swimming Club, was sort of one of the main clubs in the town, and I was a member there. I was an okay swimmer. I wouldn't say I was anything particularly special. Had a few mates who were a fair bit better than me, but I love my swimming. And Dane Valley was a good swimming club because I've got my own kids now, and I'm always kind of mindful of these clubs that get, the young kids training, sort of 6-7 times a week from being, 8 or 9 years old. And my club definitely wasn't that sort of environment. It was competitive. We did galas, you wanted to do as well as you could, but it was sort of, there was like 3 or 4 sessions per week that the swimming club did. And I started off with just doing 1 or 2, and, it progressed eventually to swimming a bit more seriously and swimming sort of 3 times a week. But it was never that sort of, getting up at like 6 o'clock in the morning, do your 2 hours before school. It wasn't that kind of club. But what the club did have was it had a biathlon club attached to it, which sent the kids to do run swim competitions. And I probably found fairly quickly that I was a better runner than I was a swimmer, actually, even though, as I said, started off in the swimming club. So I ended up doing these biathlon competitions from being about 8 or 9 years old. They were always kind of on a Sunday, and it was not like triathlon is. There's not the continuous element. You went on it. You did swim in the morning. There'd be a couple of hours break. You go outside and play football with your mates for a bit, and then you go off and you do the run. And the club was great. I had a lot of friends who were part of it. And these competitions were organised by it was sort of the pathway structure for the Modern Pentathlon Association, which was the governing body for the sport of Modern Pentathlon. And you'd go along to these competitions, and they say, "Oh, come try a bit of shooting, come try a bit of fencing," to try and get the kids who were probably the better runners and swimmers to eventually, I suppose, lead up towards doing modern pentathlon. And I mean, I was a kid who I loved doing sport. I loved watching sport. So the idea that you could do a sport where there wasn't just one thing to do, you could do 5 different things was an attraction to me. And I was playing tennis, I was playing football, and I was doing running and swimming, and then sort of slowly kind of started building up the various elements of the pentathlon. Shooting, probably when I was about 11 years old, it was just air pistol, shooting. Yeah. So it was, sort of a precision type shooting. It wasn't I think Pentathlon had previously used 2.2 pistols, which are much more they cause a lot more damage if you were to fire those at a target. But these are air pistols, tiny little pellets. And then started doing a bit of fencing, probably when I was about 13 or 14, and around the same time started to do some horse riding as well. And I always bristle slightly because people are like, "Oh, Modern Pentathlon, that sounds like a really sort of posh sport. You must have had your own horse." And it was like, well, no, I didn't have my own horse. And in fact, my parents were really good. They took me to like swimming club, as I say, 3 or 4 times a week. But on a Saturday afternoon when I was learning to ride, my parents used to, give me the cash for a riding lesson, but just said, well, there's a riding school, at the top of that hill over there. We lived in Congleton. There was a place called Biddulph Moor, which was about 5 miles out of town on the top of this massive hill. And there was a farm on top of it, which had some riding stables. They said, there's some money. If you want to go and have your riding lessons, then, you've got a mountain bike, you can kind of go and cycle up there. So I used to cycle up to the top of this place called Biddulph Moor and have my riding lessons. And actually, of course, when you learn to ride, I mean, I was like sort of a mid-teens lad at that stage. And most of the people who were learning to ride were like 7 or 8 year old girls, which for me at that stage of my life was a completely uncool thing to be in this riding lesson with like all these young girls. So I didn't like tell any of my mates that at school that I was having sort of riding lessons. I just sort of kept it quiet, really. And I was doing the odd competition in pentathlon, but my riding was, and still my fencing probably, was not at a particularly like high level or anything. And it wasn't until I went to university down south that pentathlon at that point kind of really took over for me, and that's when I started taking it much more seriously. So even though I was doing all these elements of pentathlon during my time at school, and as I say, I had done the odd competition, it was still at a fairly sort of low level. But it wasn't until that sort of university period that I started taking it more seriously.
Yeah, you went down and met all the posh kids then.
well, I was lucky. I was history was my subject at university, and I went to study at St Peter's College in Oxford. And I was very fortunate in that. Pentathlons, look, is a fairly small sport, so you can make an impact, reasonably quickly. And but there's also sort of small pockets of kind of where people are sort of training, and it just so happened, just one of those coincidences, these things for whatever reason kind of happen. You get the right people in the right place at the right time. And there was just, when I turned up at Oxford, there was sort of the the beginnings of what was a really, really sort of strong team. There was on both the men's and the women's side, there was 3 or 4 lads who were, kind of junior international level. A couple of really kind of inspirational people there who were like really keen on the sport, who'd been in Oxford for sort of 3 or 4 years already. And on the girls' side, a couple of, really sort of strong athletes who were like me, were sort of at the, had done a little bit of pentathlon, but were, maybe on the verge of kind of progressing to that next level. And I think that team environment, sort of, even though it's an individual sport, I think that's kind of team environment really sort of took us all at the same time to a higher level. And just little things that I ended up doing my first junior international when I was like 19, nearly 20 in 1997, and it was sort of it was like the B team basically, because there was a team that had gone to the junior worlds that year, and then they had another international where they could send people to, and the 3 people that they picked were all from that Oxford team basically. And so it was great that I was in that sort of environment with people who I was training with on a daily basis, but we were sort of pushing each other to at that start of a sort of an international pentathlon career. Yeah. And I think one element of that was that the varsity match between Cambridge was also really sort of closely contested and a really kind of fierce competition. And I'd no idea about any of this before I turned up in Oxford, but it was only once I got there and realised that amongst the students, that was like forget your sort of your national championships or whatever, the varsity match was kind of the big competition of the year, which you think, well, surely that how many good pentathletes can there have been at 2 universities? But actually, Cambridge also had a very, very strong team. Again, similar to us, had some sort of junior international athletes, and were really, really quite strong. So the competition was fiercely fought, and like the athletes within Oxford itself had sort of spurred each other on. The fact that we had those sort of rivals at Cambridge also kind of spurred each other on as well. So there's the varsity match at the end of my first year, we actually lost that match, and that wasn't because we were poor. That was because Cambridge had just some really, really good athletes. And then I became the team captain at the end of that year, and we were just really determined to kind of turn what had been a disappointment of that year around. And I was a little bit of a part of that, and encouraging everyone to really train hard for that next year. And my story actually about the second year at university was the funny thing was not necessarily on the men's side. I mean, we won our event, and that was great. First time Oxford won for a number of years. But on the women's side, unfortunately, the Oxford women lost that varsity match. But they had 2 athletes on their team. One, a girl called Steph Cook, and another called Emily DeReal, who was American. So they were on the losing team in the varsity match. And then 3 years later, they were the gold and silver medalists in modern pentathlon at the Olympic Games in Sydney. Yeah. So it just kind of, showed the sort of the standard that there was, that you could have these athletes who within that Olympic cycle were losing a varsity match, but 3 years later were going on and getting the 2 top steps at the Olympic Games. So I always use that as a sub when people are like, oh, how serious can university pentathlon have been? But it really was a very, a really good level. And it was just great to be part of that. Made some, I think you'll know from your time doing age group triathlon, it's as much about the people that you meet and as much as like the actual events that you do. You meet some people who become really good friends, and you see regularly at events. And I'm still in touch with a number of those people now. In one of my really close mates who actually lives in Australia, but he's just come back to the UK for a short holiday, and we've been in touch quite regularly over the last few days. So you make friends for life, and it was brilliant.
Yeah, I mean that's an added bonus, isn't it, to keeping fit and doing the exercise and going all over the world with age group. But the people that you meet in the team, and not just in your own team like GB, throughout the world, all different nationalities. It's really cool.
So the next level, I think, was at that time, you kind of remember that there'd been the sort of disastrous Atlanta Olympics where the British team in general hadn't done particularly well, and sort of lottery funding was kind of coming in then, and the whole idea behind UK sport was to sort of make sure that we didn't repeat that lack of medals that we got from that Olympics, and more funding was kind of going into sport, more sort of training centres were being set up, and and similarly with, that was happening within Pentathlon as well. And they got a new head coach, a guy who came in from the Czech Republic, and he set up a new national training centre down in Bath at Bath University. So that was sort of 99, 2000 when that was being set up. So that was, once I'd sort of done my sort of university thing initially, that was kind of the next step for me. I'd stayed on in Oxford after for one more year to do a law conversion course after finishing my history degree. But then as soon as I'd done that, I then went down to Bath, moved down there, moved in with another athlete friend of mine. We were sharing a place. And did a couple of years down in Bath as part of the sort of Great Britain kind of setup there, and that's when, having competed at that sort of junior international level, that's when pentathlon started to become quite a bit more serious for me. I mean, for 1 year it was like a full-time occupation really. I wasn't doing anything else. I had a year out, wasn't doing any studies or anything. Was just solely training down at the centre, going to training camps abroad, regular competitions abroad, and actually I always think it was a good lesson about myself, I think, at that time, in that first year when I was just doing nothing else apart from the sport. I actually didn't do as well as kind of I hoped I would do, and I think there was an element that, particularly when I was going to competitions, I was getting very, very nervous. I found probably putting a lot of pressure on myself. I knew I was training well, but pentathlon, because it's got that kind of skills element, it's not just your sort of physical performance, but elements like shooting, fencing, riding. You've got to have really good sort of mental strength for those disciplines as well. And I was kind of letting myself down in competition quite a lot, and not perhaps performing at the level that my training was suggesting that it should have been. And I think it was just I just put myself under too much pressure to think I'm just training, so surely I must be able to go to these competitions and be successful. But it didn't really happen that year. That would have been 2001, and I went to the World Championships at the end of that year. Actually, they were in Great Britain, so I competed on sort of home turf, but didn't have a particularly strong competition. But I stayed in Bath for another year after that, but actually combined my time training with doing my final year of law studies. So that was before I could go on and work in a law firm.
Yeah.
And I probably wasn't training as hard as I had done the previous year, because of course I had all these kind of studies to fit in, and the first sort of part of that year was quite intense with the course and stuff. But I just seemed to be competing much better. That sort of pressure seemed to not be quite as intense, and I was a bit more relaxed when I went to competitions, and I had a much better year that year in terms of my competitions. And I finished up the last main event of the year was the World Championships, which was in San Francisco at Stanford University. And I managed to finish. I made the final, and I finished 24th in the final, which, you think, well, 24th in the world, that's, didn't get near a medal or anything, but that was that genuinely was a quite a good performance. I mean, we'd had a couple of British guys who, a guy called Greg White and another guy called Rick Phelps, who'd been sort of mainstays of the British team for many years, up until about a couple of years before that point. And they were sort of the only ones who sort of replicated that performance. We'd not had anyone from the sort of generation of the younger athletes sort of coming through like me, who'd sort of matched that really. I mean, now we've got we've got the Olympic champion in Modern Pentathlon. So finishing 24th seems like something and nothing. But
24th in the world. I mean, let's just take, all we ever think about is first, second, and third, don't we?
Yeah.
Whatever you're watching, that's all that matters. I've just been watching the cycling this afternoon, Tour of the Alps, and that's all you see, 1, 2, and 3. That's it. But you've got to put it in the context. You're talking about 24 in the whole of the world. That's massive, isn't it?
So I knew where I'd come from in quite a short space of time, and that was a good result. So I was very pleased with that. And I did, then there was a bit of a sort of choice to make, because I had a job already lined up with a law firm, it was, do I sort of hold off with that job? I've had a good success in this competition, and a lot of different things went through my mind at that point. Actually, one thing, my mum hadn't been very well. She was and my family was obviously based up in Manchester, and there's a lot of different things sort of went through my mind at that point. And I just felt I'd enjoyed that year, but I almost felt I would have been going back to that previous year where I'd just been sort of full-time training, and I knew that hadn't really worked for me. And I just thought, you know what? I've had a great time doing pentathlon. It's been a fantastic journey, you know, great sort of 8-9 years doing the sport, and you know, perhaps it's just sort of time to knock it on the head, you know, sort of go out on a bit of a high, really. But I didn't want to stop doing sport. That was for sure. And I knew that I'd actually won the run in the pentathlon at the World Championships. So my run had always been a real sort of strong event for me. And I'd never kind of really tested myself out just as a runner. And I thought, you know what, actually, I could still run twice a day and do a job. So let's just have a crack at running and kind of see where that takes me. So that's where the next sort of chapter of running came in, basically. And I moved on from pentathlon at that point in my mid-20s.
Cool. Just going back to your pentathlon, and you said you took the year out. Did you get funding for all that? How was it set up?
Yeah. So we got, I mean, I was living like, I always say to people, I was living like a well-off student. You know, I was getting some, you know, very gratefully accepted money from the lottery program, but it wasn't life-changing money. It was, you know, it was a sort of few thousand, and also the added benefit of when you went to training camps, you know, you got your accommodation and you got your, you know, all your coaching and your food paid for and stuff. So it basically enabled me to come out from my time of being a student without any debts at all, which, you know, not all of my mates who'd not been doing sport were able to say. So it certainly wasn't making me any, and I wasn't making any money through the competitions either. You know, it was, I mean, I think when I won the run at the World Championships, I think I got a pair of sunglasses or a pair of trainers or something. So it was, you know, it was definitely not life-changing sums of money.
Now, there's this fallacy, isn't there, about people who go off and do all these different sports thinking that they're actually making a living out of it. Well, actually, they're not really. They're just surviving, aren't they? Just doing it just to do the competitions. And
yes. If you can make enough money to kind of pay your way, you know, for a vast majority of people, of course, you know, your Mo Farahs or whatever, you know, make a very tidy sum out of the sport. But for the vast majority who are competing at my level, you know, and even someone like you know, Steph, my friend who won the gold in Sydney, you know, she retired from pentathlon in 2001 and straight away went to work as a doctor. So, you know, it wasn't like she then retired and went to the beach in Barbados on the proceeds of a pentathlon career.
Brilliant. So moving on to the next stage in your sporting life, you mentioned running there.
Yeah. So I didn't know where, you know, sort of where the running would take me. I didn't even know what my event might be, to be honest. I mean, pentathlon was a 3K, and I always thought my sort of strength was maybe at an event slightly quicker than 3K, maybe sort of, you know, possibly 1500. And I'd also, one of my first sort of memories of life was watching Steve Cram win the world title at 1500 in 1983. And I'd loved that sort of whole period of, you know, British middle distance running in the 80s. And like Steve Cram was a bit of a sort of sport. Yeah, I was in the sort of Cram, Cohen, Ovett. I mean, Ovett was probably, I mean, I didn't really get into sport until sort of 82, 83 really was sort of first years I remember. So Ovett was possibly slightly past his prime by then, but I was definitely, you know, like watching the Los Angeles Olympics, you know, Steve Cram I wanted to win rather than Seb Coe. So he was my man as far as that was concerned.
He was a northerner.
Well, yeah, he was a northerner. Yes, yeah. He had just a beautiful like running style as well. He was, you know, similar sort of height to me, and not that I've got a beautiful running style, but he was just great to watch, I thought. So yeah, I thought, you know, I'd maybe try a bit of 1500 and, you know, try and increase my mileage, because in pentathlon, I don't know, we've been doing maybe like 20 miles a week, perhaps, of running, because we need to sort of save our legs for all the other events, and particularly fencing. So I'd never done sort of big mileage. And I'd done a couple of sort of inter-counties cross-country events. And there was a guy called Adrian who was a team manager for the Cheshire cross-country team. And I knew he knew the sort of area. And I sort of said to him, like, well, you know, what running club should I go to? And he said, well, you know, I think Altrincham have got quite a good running team. Maybe you sort of want to go and run down there. So I went down to Altrincham Athletics Club and, you know, straight away met, you know, 3 or 4 guys who've kind of become real sort of, you know, mates for life, basically. A lad who was my best man at my wedding, and, you know, real sort of good friends. And that was, you know, just a great sort of starting place for my sort of transformation into a runner, really. And was doing all my training sort of with Altrincham, just picking up as much as I could about running, doing a sort of a more sort of endurance program to start with, because there were a few of those guys are sort of 5K, 10K guys. That kind of worked in quite well with me, because I was able to sort of build up my endurance and get my mileage a lot higher. And I ended up running, once I've been going a few years, I was sort of running regular kind of 80, 90 mile weeks over the winter. But then backing that off and taking 1500s more seriously over the summer. And kind of straight away, I mean, I thought to start with, if I could run under 4 minutes for 1500, I remember that that would be a big achievement for me. And almost sort of kind of straight away the following summer, after I'd moved back to Manchester, I managed to kind of break through 1500 within 4 minutes for 1500 within sort of a handful of races. And I thought, wow, I've sort of made quite a big progress in a fairly short space of time. And I got quickly down to about 346 over the sort of first year or two, which was a pretty reasonable time for 1500. You're sort of knocking on the door of competing at kind of national level with that sort of time. That sort of time will qualify you for like a national championships. So yeah, and I was doing so quite well with that, and loved the training at Altrincham. I had was getting some advice off one of the coaches there, and then there was another strong middle distance group in the Manchester area, sort of which was more associated with Sale Harriers, which is a different club and quite a well-known club in the Manchester area. And they had a very well-known middle distance coach, a guy called Norman Poole, who was, coached a number of athletes at middle distance over many years, people like Diane Madal and Anne Griffiths and Kevin McKay, Tom Lancashire, Michael Rimmer, people like that. So, he has a really good sort of reputation. And I kind of sort of started joining that group after being back in Manchester for 2 or 3 years. And that was, again, I suppose I've never really thought about it this way until I've started speaking to you, but each time you sort of kind of progressed as I've got on, and I felt that I'd probably kind of reached the maximum of my abilities in firstly in pentathlon, then with the sort of the level that I was at 1500 meters with Altrincham, it's sort of that 346 level. And if I was going to get to a bit of a better level, then it was probably time to sort of take advice from elsewhere and move in with a different group, and that worked out really well. So, and then in 2006-07 were probably my best years at 1500, and I ended up running 342 I got down to for 1500, which was a good national level time. I was running kind of in the national championships, made the national championships final, and probably my best achievement was I managed to run a sub 4 minute mile in 2007, so August 2007, when I was just 30. And I ran 3:59.57, so not by much, but as long as it starts with a 3, that was the main thing, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was good. I was really lucky that day, because they'd had there's a race called the Emsley Car Mile, which you may have heard of. It's always been kind of a traditional race, and won by some fantastic athletes. People like John Walker and Peter Elliott have won the Emsley Car Mile, and I think they still have it now. But it had gone through a little bit of a lull in terms of the venue that they'd had it in. But they were trying to sort of build it up again, and they had it at one of the tracks not too far from my house in Manchester, at Stretford at Longford Park, and they put on a good event. That was the day I ran sub 4, I think the race was running 3:54, and there was about 6 people who managed to get sub 4. So it was a very high standard race, but it was just great. The conditions were perfect. There was no wind. The temperature was perfect. The race just panned out absolutely brilliantly for me. They had a good pacemaker the first couple of laps. An American guy sort of took off at the front, and then there was a group of sort of 4 or 5 of us kind of in single file, just sort of running around one behind another, and I just managed to sneak under 4 minutes. And I think there's probably, if I'd have tried that to get that time 6 months earlier or 6 months later, I might have missed that window. I think I was just in that sort of sweet spot. I was in really good shape that summer, and I'm always sort of grateful that I managed to just kind of hit it right and get in again, right place at right time. So shows you that luck does definitely play a part often in these things. You can train and compete as hard as you possibly can, but sometimes you do need that little bit of luck on your side.
You do, absolutely, yeah. But then you make your own luck by doing the work in the first place.
Yeah. You've got to put yourself in that right environment, haven't you? Yeah, definitely. Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, that was a sort of career at 1500, and then again, I suppose I've always I've moved on from things quite quickly. I think once I'd I knew, I felt like I just didn't feel like there was anything left at 1500. I just didn't think I was going to get any quicker. I thought I really had to maximize my potential for what I could do. And I was going back to that background that I'd had with ultraing, I really enjoyed that sort of endurance side, and I was doing quite a big mileage over the winter. And I thought, well, I'll just perhaps move up a distance and see how I get on there. And I sort of took to doing 5K over the next kind of 3 or 4 years. I really, funnily enough, I really kind of enjoyed that training, and I'd probably take as much satisfaction, even though if you look at these sort of comparison tables of what your sort of best event or what your best performance is, my mile performance kind of stands out as the best thing that I've done. But I do take a great deal of satisfaction that about 3 years after that, I trained specifically to try and go sub 14 for 5K. And I trained really hard for that. And, I was doing very specific sessions, just everything was kind of focused towards that. And luckily enough, again, in Manchester, they had another good meet set up as part of the British Milers Club, which is it's a sort of really well-run middle distance endurance organization that puts on paced graded races at the sort of top national end of athletics in Britain. They've done a sort of a sterling job really with, kind of keeping standards high at those sort of events. So I went and ran in the A race at that British Milers Club meet in Manchester, and just sneaked under 14 minutes for 5K. I managed to run 13:58, and I think that was 2010 when I did that.
Wow.
So yeah, I was quite lucky in that I just fell on the right side of 2 quite big barriers really. So it's always good to say that I've run 13 something for 5K, and I was really proud of that achievement. As I say, probably not quite as good as the 5K as a mile on your sort of metrics tables, but still something that I was particularly proud of. And I remember being so kind of attuned to what I needed to do because to run 5K, you're looking at sort of 67-second laps. And, at that time, my coach could have said, go and run a lap in 66 seconds or go and run a lap in 67 seconds. And I could pretty much have done it without even looking at my watch. I kind of knew just exactly what it felt like, whereas, if you took someone I always think if you took someone out of a pub and said, go and run a lap in that time, they'd be like 20-30 seconds off, wouldn't they? But I was just so kind of attuned with what needed to be done for that race that I could have done it to within like half a second really.
Your body does become, I think we get too much reliant on this, don't we, sometimes? On the watches and things. It's good to sometimes just go out and not run with anything and just see where you're at. And
some of my better road races have been like that, or like the odd race back in the day when your watch used to fail on you or something and you kind of lose the metrics, and actually you run in fact, I remember back in the day I didn't used to run with a watch on at all, and it was like a little bit of a superstition of mine, particularly when I was running on the track. When I was running at 1500, I just thought, well, what is the point in kind of having the watch on really? Like, there's not, just race it. Don't worry too much about what the time is going to be or might be, or is it halfway around the race. And it was a bit of a superstition. I always took my watch off. It's only recently now that, everyone runs the watch nowadays, don't they?
You haven't got a Garmin. If it's not on Strava, you haven't done it.
It's not happened. It didn't even happen. No, you're right.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So moving on from the running then, how did that, obviously you'd mentioned in your email that you'd suffered injury. Was that through all the running that you'd done? Or
it's hard to tell whether it was something that was always there, whether the running's exacerbated it. I don't think I'll ever get the genuine answer to that. But effectively, I had a bone spur at the end of my femur, so the bit that sort of connects into your hip socket joint, and my hip started getting quite painful. Must have been about 2014 I started getting trouble with it, and it got to the point where I just wasn't able to kind of run at all. Eventually went to the doctor, got it scanned, and they said they diagnosed this problem. And And I had this operation where they effectively did three things. They kind of shaved the bone spur off. They got rid of the sort of growth at the end of the bone. That had caused some damage to the cartilage. So they kind of got rid of all the damaged cartilage. And then they also did this thing, sounds a bit weird, but they do a microfracture where they would effectively kind of break your bone at the end. And that stimulates the bone marrow to kind of regrow as a sort of a layer of sort of absorbency, because you've obviously lost a lot of cartilage. So, and cartilage doesn't regrow itself. So you need that sort of, extra sort of absorbency, in the hip joint itself. And I actually got running, I got going back running pretty well from after the operation, which must have been about 2015, the operation was. I definitely lost a little bit. Like at that time I was, and it's hard to know, isn't it? Because by that stage I was mid-30s now. I was starting to slow up a little bit anyway. So I'd run 29:30 for 10K, but I'd say, probably fair to say, by about 2014-15, I was probably only in about maybe just outside 30-minute shape. So I wasn't quite in the sort of form that I had been 3 or 4 years ago in my sort of early 30s, really. So I got back after the operation. I was probably still in not far off like 31-minute shape, 31-minute 10K shape. So I wasn't in, I'd not lost huge amounts, but there definitely was, I'd lost an element of it. And of course, as part of all the rehab, I wasn't able to do as much running. So I was filling in a little bit with doing some swimming, and I'd cycled to work as well. So I was perhaps taking the cycling a little bit more seriously rather than just going to and from my house. Occasionally I would kind of, do a roundabout way and do an extra, half an hour or so. So I was starting to do all those little elements of triathlon, and I thought, what, why don't I just enter a triathlon and just see how I get on?
Do you think in the back of your mind, because of you had the issue with running, you thought about triathlon anyway? Do you think?
I think,
Consciously, you were trying to build up to, or you were going to build up to doing a triathlon.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and I was just like really kind of inexperienced. I didn't know anything about kind of proper cycling training. I didn't have my bike set up. I like literally had, a 500 quid road bike, and it got to the sort of week before the first triathlon that I did, and someone suggested, well, have you got like a time trial bike? And I was like time trial bike, well, do you think I need to take one of those this triathlon?
This is my first triathlon. Why do I want to?
And yeah, of course, I knew I'd watched sports, so I knew time trial bikes existed, but it had never even gone through my head. And I thought, well, how do I even sort of balance on the sort of bars and stuff? And I was a bit sort of nervous about it. So anyway, I got a pair of clip-on like aero bars, as most people do. And actually, I think I must have put them on like 2 days before the race, and inevitably when you do that, you try and get down in the time trial position during the race, and you just immediately you think, crikey, this feels so dangerous. I can't possibly do this. I suspect I probably, in that first sprint triathlon that I did, I probably spent about 2 minutes on the aero bars because I was just too frightened to get down on them. So yeah, but as I say, I was still, running, I'd say, was still my main focus at that point, and probably remains so for about 3 or 4 more years. Although I was doing a bit more of triathlon each year. Maybe I had a bit of a play around at Olympic distance. I did some some events there, and I was getting some pretty decent results. I obviously got introduced to doing age group competitions, and eventually I went to my first age group competition, or qualified for the first age group one, which was Rotterdam, which, if memory serves me correctly, would have been 2017, and I qualified for.
Just tracking back a bit, how did you find out? Were you in a club, or did you know of a triathlete? How did you find out about it?
Yeah. So I was part of Manchester Triathlon Club, at the time. I don't know who mentioned to me about doing age group competitions or how I found out about it. Just on the grapevine, generally, someone obviously suggested that there was this, pretty good setup. And I must say, triathlon is much more well set up for age group competitions than athletics is, really. I think athletics, yes, it's getting a bit better now, but as in triathlon, there really is a focus on that age group competitions, and it's as we've said before, you meet some great people, you make some great friends, but it's also, when you get out there, it's really good, strong competition. And obviously,
I don't think there's another sport like it, to be honest.
No, I don't think there is. And and particularly on a British level as well, because you know that when you go as a part of a British team, you're always going to be one of the strongest teams as well. But that's not to say that, you know, you turn up for one of these events and you know, and because you're in the British team, you automatically win the thing. You know, there's still some very, very good, you know, in some international competitors as well. So it was really good to test yourself. So yeah, Rotterdam was my first one in 2017.
Yeah, and was that a sprint or a standard?
I did the Olympic distance there. So, and I did get a medal. I came third. So I did do, you know, I did reasonably well, considering, you know, I probably, you know, if I look back, it's 5 years ago now, I probably know so much more about triathlon now than I did then. So I would have been competing. So 2017, that would have been my first year as a V40. So I was at the very first year. So I was a bit of a sweet spot, really. I was at, you know, a good age to kind of start, because I was at the young end of that 40 age group.
But still very competitive.
No, it was a competitive event. I mean, I think the two, it was a British guy, Donald Brooks, who you probably know, one of the sort of very strong age group. One of the very strong age group competitors, he's exactly the same age as me. And then there's, I think, an Italian guy who came second. They were quite a way, to be fair, they were quite a way in front of me. But yeah, I managed to still sneak a medal out of it, so that was good. And then
that stands like your background in great stead, really, because obviously coming from a swimming background and then the run capability that you have.
Yeah,
you know, it's only the bike that you've recently been focusing on and concentrating on that was the weakest link, wasn't it?
Yeah. And
within your first competition, you've gone and medalled. It's just your ability, really.
Yeah, it was good, and I knew my run was, you know, I was still probably in, you know, 31, 15, 10K shape at that time. So that was a very strong, you know, performance. But I mean, you know, you always hope that your skills are going to kind of carry you through. But I do remember that competition that I'd lost so much ground, the top two on the bike, that even my run just didn't get me anywhere near them. So I was still taking, you know, a couple of minutes out of the front two on the run, but I was still so far behind because my cycling really wasn't at any sort of level that was allowing me to keep up with them. They were just, you know, so far gone that my chance of winning the event had sort of disappeared on the bike, basically. So my swim was keeping me where I needed to be. My bike was losing me a lot, and then my run was kind of bringing me up at the end.
And how did you find the transformation from like the pool into open water?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I actually, you know, to start with, when I first started swimming open water, was a little bit apprehensive about it, even though I was a strong swimmer. I mean, I'd swum in my time doing pentathlon. My 200 meter PB was 2:09, which, you know, is that's a pretty strong time. I mean, in pentathlon terms at that time, the top guys were doing about sort of 2:01, 2:02. So I was a bit off that, but it was still, you know, 2:09 was in a short course pool, long course, a couple of seconds on top of that. But you know, that was you know, my swim was reasonable, and I think open water did hold a bit of a concern for me. But actually, I think I do benefit massively from the wetsuit. I'm one of those athletes who, relatively to others, seems to benefit more from the wetsuit. And I wonder why that is. I don't know whether it's because I've got a weaker core, or I'm quite tall and thin. So, and I always feel like my legs in a pool, you know, really sort of drop down quite substantially. And I'd always gotten much better sticking a pull board between my legs, because if that, you know, that brings my legs up, I find I could keep up with people, whereas other people might not get that much advantage. But the wetsuit definitely helps me out in an open water swim. And so once I realized that you know, there was no concern to swimming open water, and actually relatively the wetsuit swim suited me better, then I quite enjoyed that, really.
Yeah, it's a different environment, obviously, to the pool, isn't it? And I find it a lot better to swim open water personally.
I think I probably prefer competing open water. I find it more interesting. You know, that sort of real race element. I find sprint triathlon swims in a pool a bit frustrating, where you've got other people in the lane with you and you're not really sure where everyone else is. Whereas I do love that sort of, the horn goes and everyone kind of goes off the and I'm competitive as well. So I love getting in that environment where you've got, some people don't like it, do they? Where you've got people arms thrashing around everywhere else. But I love that. I thrive off that. I think that's really great. But I think for training, I'd always stick with being in the pool, because you get your metrics and you get your sort of feedback, don't you? I mean, I think it's sometimes hard to tell how well or badly you're swimming in open water, whereas in the pool, you know the distance is the same, and it's just easy to do your training sessions. I get much more out of training in the pool, but then you need to do a little bit of practice in the open water just to make sure that you've got your technique right, and you sorted out your sighting, all that kind of thing. So
yeah, it's a mix, isn't it? Especially if you're gonna be racing in open water, then you need to know the environment.
Yeah,
excellent.
So I was going to say that. So yeah, after the Rotterdam event, I then did Glasgow the year after. That was 2018, but that was sprint distance. Now I think from then on, it's become much more sort of sprint distance focused. And I realized that was sort of probably my better distance, probably an easier distance to train for, because I've got a young family as well. So, Olympic distance, you're talking about needing to do those longer bike rides, the longer running sessions. Whereas, the sprint distance is still relatively short and sharp training. Although I've started working with a coach actually in the last 18 months or so. And people will probably look at my training and think it's probably more geared towards doing kind of sort of half Ironman and Olympic, because I do put in, a fair bit of aerobic training as well, but the focus for competing is a sprint distance, and that's as much to do with the hip as anything else, really, because of in the last sort of 18 months, going back to what we said before, having had that diagnosis, that the hip was in a bit of a poor way, really. I can only sort of do a couple of runs, 3 runs a week. So that the sprint distance off the back of that has absolutely become the focus, and that for me will be the focus for this year as well. So that's those events I'll be doing.
That's a good thing, isn't it? That you're aware of that, so you're not going to do yourself too much damage, and you can focus more on the bike. And with the bike being all right, it's still 20k, but it's not a massive amount. It's not twice the amount, so you can focus on your bike and get your bike better. And,
Yeah. And I think I've come into biking, funnily enough, at a great time with the whole sort of, actually that sort of lockdown period, everyone getting on Zwift, I was, back in the day, when I was first sort of, starting doing a bit of cycling, the idea of sort of training over the winter was just so much more difficult and also arduous, really, wasn't it? You had kind of basic turbo trainer setups and, whereas now the whole Zwift thing that's just spiraled off the lockdown period, everyone's on Zwift, all your mates are on Zwift. You can do the 30-night time trials, you can do all the races, you can do training sessions on there, you can get on Discord and speak with your mates at the same time as you're doing a training session, and it's just worked out so well, really. And the transition for me to doing more serious biking has been brilliant, and I've enjoyed the training this winter as much as I've enjoyed any winter training at any of the sports I've done in the past, really. Thanks to Zwift.
It's so good because you'll go off and do things on Zwift that you wouldn't do outside. Like your training sessions, like your sweet spot training and your hit sessions and things, and you probably never do. You go out for a long ride, or I would certainly go out for a long ride on the bike or a social ride, but I probably wouldn't go out and do half the sessions that I do on Zwift to bring you up to that level.
And when I have to be quite sort of rigid and quite fixed with my training. I've got certain times when I can train because of the family or because of fitting it around work. It's often kind of maybe get something done early in the morning or get something done late at night. And of course, in the winter, once it gets to 3 o'clock, then you can't go out and train on your bike. Whereas I do a lot of my bike training in the evening when the kids are in bed. So I just wouldn't have been able to do that training that I've done, but I've done countless sessions at 7, 8 o'clock in the evening over the winter that, if it'd just been 30 years ago and you actually have to do the training on your bike, I just wouldn't have been able to do them. So it's worked out really well for me.
It would have been a set of the old style rollers, I'm afraid, in the shed. Tumbling, balancing on or falling off your rollers into the garage wall. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Excellent. So that brings us up to date then. You qualified for the sprint triathlon. What have you done since then?
Yeah, so I mean, the last couple of years has been funny, hasn't it? Because there haven't been that many competitions. So 2018, I did the Glasgow, which is the one that was part of the Commonwealth Games, and I got a silver again. I think Donald won that race again. So he sort of comes up quite regularly when I'm competing. So that was 2018, and then 2019. For whatever reason, I think the competitions that I was keen on doing were either in ridiculous places, because that's the thing with triathlon, isn't it? You've got you as well as do you actually want to do the event? You've also kind of got to look into is it feasible to get there, or is it actually a place that you want to visit, or does it combine with the time that I can train or I can compete in the year, if we got anything else on with the family or whatever. So I didn't do a triathlon in 2019. I did do still some masters athletics. In fact, I think I did the European Masters 1500 meters that summer. So I went back and competed on the track. But then 2020, complete write-off. Yeah. And then 2021 was pretty much a write-off until right at the end of the year. I did the sprint distance championships, which was the combined sprint standard race in Valencia when they had the Europeans out there. Yeah. So I went out there at the end of last year. The only slight downside to that was literally the week before. I'd trained really well because there's nothing else to do, was there, during COVID? You could only training was the only thing you could do. So I was genuinely in really good shape, and I'd started working with the coach 6 months before, so I felt I gained plenty on the bike, and there was something to sort of really to sort of show for the training that I'd done. And my youngest daughter was about 2.5 at the time, was just learning to ride her own bike, and I was teaching on a bike, and of course I was running over, sort of bent over, pushing her on the bike, and I pulled something in my back, like literally the week before the race, and I was in my back, without hamming it up completely, but I was in a really bad way. The night I did it, I couldn't bend over to put a spoon in the top level of the dishwasher, which basically meant moving forward by about 2 degrees, and I literally couldn't do that. I was just completely rigid, and even I went out to Valencia thinking I'm just not going to be able to compete here. I mean, I'm completely wasting my time. Even thought about not bothering getting on the plane, but I did. Of course, the plane journey was really arduous because you're cramped up on the plane, sat in a really sort of rigid seat. So that was a nightmare. I tried to run the day before the race, and I got 100 meters down the street doing a half jog, and I just couldn't go any further. And I was just like, this is absolutely ridiculous. I'm not going to be able to do anything. The only thing that kind of saved me was I've been having a hot water bottle on my back. That was the only thing that was loosening it up. Yeah. So I'd spent just every sort of half an hour putting this hot water bottle on the, and I warmed up going to the event with the hot water bottle stuffed inside my triathlon suit, just to get my back a little bit loose. And I actually think because the swim and the bike weren't too bad, it was the run that was the one causing me problems. I think if the run had been the first element of the triathlon, I wouldn't have been able to compete. But I did the swim, I did the bike, probably loosened it up a little bit, and a bit of adrenaline for the competition, and I managed to get through it. The really frustrating thing was it was one of those daft COVID events as well, where everyone was setting off at sort of 5-second intervals, so you got no idea where you were in the race. There was everyone was just at different sort of times, and you literally had to cross the finish line and wait 2 hours for the results. Anyway, they came out, and the 3 Spanish guys I had 3 really strong Spanish guys in my category, and they were first, second, and third, and I was 4th by about 20 seconds. So I just missed out on a medal, but I was only about a minute off gold. So I'm not saying I would have won it, but clearly I was hampered by the back injury, and I think I probably would have got a medal, but sort of a debate as to what colour that would have been had my back not been so bad. But you got to take these things in the right way, and hopefully that gave me a bit of motivation for training for this year. That we've got a full year this year. I've entered for both the Europeans and the Worlds at the sprint distance, and hopefully that sort of poor experience in Valencia has kind of spurred me on to make sure that this time I can challenge for some medals.
Excellent. Well, good luck with it all. I'm sure if you manage 4th with the bad back,
Well,
you're gonna absolutely smash it.
yeah, well, of course, and the added advantage this year is that this is my first year as I've moved up categories. So this is my first year in the 45 to 49. So, I mean, sometimes that doesn't mean an awful lot because, the categories, I think from sort of 40 going up to kind of, even the 50 to 54, the standard is pretty strong across all three of those categories.
Yeah. Up to 60, 65, it's just
in some ways, it seems to mean that the older you get, the more money that you've got to spend on a good bike. So it seems the standard sometimes gets better the older you get.
Yeah, it's not just the equipment now, but the level of ability, even as you're getting up, and the amount of people that are involved. And as I've found in my age group, which is now I've gone up 55 to 59, the numbers just don't diminish. It's just like there's the most people in those categories.
Yes, I think you're right.
About those middle ages, it's incredible, really.
Yeah, but I'm genuinely excited because I feel like this is even going into the Valencia race, I'd not had a proper winter of the new sort of training that I've done. As I say, I started working with one of the Total Tri training coaches, a guy called Chris Standage, who's a very good age group athlete as well of his own right, and has been a pro also for a period of time as well. So he's a very strong athlete and he's kind of guiding me on the coaching front. But I'd only started working with him in about February, March of last year. So I didn't get the benefit of the winter last year. Whereas this year, I've got that full winter of having trained, under his guidance. And I feel like my cycling has definitely gone on to a different level for this coming season. So I don't think my run's lost too much. My swim is I think, I've not done any swimming races, but I feel from the training times that I'm hitting that my swimming has certainly not got any worse, even though I've got a year older. And in fact, it's probably kind of moved on a little bit as well. So, but I'm quite excited just to see where my bike actually is. I've got my first event, this proper event this weekend. I'm doing sort of a local triathlon in Wilmslow. That's my first race of the season. So I'm really excited to see how things will work out and just get the benefit of all that training that I've been doing.
Excellent. Well, good luck with it all, like I said.
Yeah, thank
you. Weekend. You'll have to let us know how you get on.
Yes, I will. Yeah. I'll let you know. Yeah, and will you be out at any of the events this year? Are you which events are you targeting? Do you don't go down as short a sprint distance, do you?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the sprint distance. Yeah.
Oh, okay, you're doing sprints, right? Okay.
Yeah. I haven't. I had qualified for Valencia, but whatever reason, I can't remember why I didn't go out in the end.
Yeah.
I've got Bilbao, which is a duathlon at the end of this year.
Yes, yeah.
But I had a crash about five weeks ago at a qualifier. Okay. Duathlon again.
Right.
So I'm just in recovery from that, really.
Okay. And are you still injured, or are you able to train properly?
I haven't got back on anything yet. Yeah, this is the 5th week, so hopefully get back on the turbo trainer and start building up slowly. I was supposed to be racing at Clumber Park this weekend.
Yes, yeah.
Duathlon, but obviously that's gone by the by. So
that's frustrating, isn't it? Because you've had 2 years of not being able to do so much, and then of course, you like me, you must have been excited about all the a full year of competitions, and then the crash means that you can't actually do what you want to. So I can imagine that's really frustrating.
Well, like you say, you've just got to take these things and pick the best out of it and move on and get back to it. It's something we enjoy anyway, isn't it? Like I always say, it's what we like to do. It's part of life. So well,
fingers crossed I'll see you out at some races soon, whether they be national or international or whatever they might be.
Yeah, that'll be cool. So just the last few questions I've got for you.
Yes, try me.
Is first quick fire question is favourite bit of kit?
Favourite bit of kit? Oh, well, I'm slightly biased, but my day job is I work for New Balance. So I've got to say,
you're a lawyer for a sporting company.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
So I've got to say a piece of running kit. So I'd say my fuel cells, my RC Elites, which are the New Balance fast super shoes, whatever people want to call them. And I think they're brilliant. One thing I really like about them, to give them a proper plug, is they're great for getting on in transitions, because I've tried some of the other brands that I won't mention, but I've found some of the other ones, particularly sort of the flimsy heels, can be really difficult to get on. But the New Balance, I think, are great, and they feel much more like a normal shoe and give a bit more sort of support. So particularly when you've got those going around those dead turns, they can be really useful. And above all, they were worn by both Alex Yee and Georgia Taylor Brown at the Olympics. So if they're wearing them, they're good enough for me.
They were sponsored by New Balance,
yeah.
and I do actually have a pair of New Balance. I can't remember, 1047s or something, that I used quite a lot. And I do like the New Balance.
Yeah, there's some good stuff. Yeah, there's Super Comp Pacer is a good shoe if you can get hold of them, because supply is a bit of an issue at the moment. But that's a really good one for doing your sessions in. That's sort of the not the all-out racing shoe. That's kind of a good sort of lightweight training shoe, and a lot of people rave about that one. I know Alex Yee again is a big fan of that one.
Yeah, well, it doesn't do him any harm, does it?
Well, exactly. Yeah. So I would say if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for most people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Too right. What are your favourite resources for training? Like, it could be websites, it could be books. What are your go-to resources?
Well, I mean, I suppose, giving my training group a plug here, really. I mean, the guys at Total Tri Training have been great for me, so I really love that. Upload my training, get my training from the coach from Training Peaks and far away. I don't really need to kind of. I think the fact that I've been doing sport for such a long period of time is I probably don't need to sort of search out that many resources now. But I'll go back to what I said before. I mean, Zwift has been a fantastic resource for me. That whole combination of doing, races on there, you can upload your training on there, so you can do your sessions on it. I couldn't. I couldn't fault Zwift. It's been brilliant for me. Those Thursday night time trials, I do it with a group of lads. One of the guys who I used to run with at Altrincham, who got me involved in the team that I race in. We race under the name of Horwich, which is a town where Nick's from. I love them. They're one of my hardest sessions of the week, but they're absolutely brilliant as well. So it's so great hearing everyone like gasping their last in the sort of sprint to the line on Discord. It's hilarious.
Brilliant. What advice would you give to anybody wanting to get into multi-sport, or who, if they're already in multi-sport, want to get into age group?
Sounds a bit sort of theoretical, not necessarily a piece of advice, but I think what you've got to be really careful with, and I've always been mindful of this, is you have to be. You will get loads and loads of advice, and probably the best piece of advice I can give is learn to filter what is good and what works for you, and what actually is just rubbish and either is poor advice or doesn't really apply to you. So you have to be quite circumspect with the advice that you do take, because people are really friendly and they always mean the best and they'll give you loads of advice. But I think above all, don't try and take everything on board, because you'll just confuse yourself and you'll go to a start line in a state of panic. Whereas just each race kind of focus on one or two things that you want to get right, and try and filter out all the nonsense. Don't overthink it.
Yeah, love that. I've not had that answer before. There's another podcast I listen to which is called Triathlon Mockery with Joe Skipper and his friend, and they call it the bullshit buster.
Maybe I said it slightly more politely than that. Yes.
You did, yeah. Excellent. But great answer. Yeah. And finally, what are your short-term and your long-term goals?
Well, I suppose short term, over the course of the next season, I think the fact that I was fourth in Valencia. I mean, if I said that I didn't want to get medals or even try and win both the sprint and sprint European and world championships this year, I'd probably be underselling myself. So hopefully I don't sound too cocky or arrogant saying that, but I think those have got to be my ambitions. Fourth place last year, I've got to be fueled by the fact that I need to be on the in the podium in both those events. And then long term, I think just to enjoy the sport for as long as I possibly can. I think the last few years have made me, things like with COVID happening, makes you realize how much you miss a sport when you can't do it. I've also had the dual issue of having that injury that I picked up, that at one stage, the times where I thought, actually, am I going to get back to competing at all? So, it makes you count your blessings and realize that ultimately you enjoy what you do, and no matter how good or how successful or what you win out of something, you just want to keep on enjoying it for as long as you possibly can. And that's, I think, also having had kids as well who are starting to do, I've started helping out with the cross country club at my eldest daughter's school this year, and just trying to get that into the kids as well. It's not just about finishing first or being the best kid when you're 9 years old. It's just developing that love of being fit, healthy, active, doing sport, and hopefully that eventually stays with you for the rest of your life, which is, I've been lucky that's exactly what's happened to me. I've you see so many people, I've seen so many people over the years who I started competing with at that age of being 9 or 10, who had way more talent than I did, but they'd stopped competing by the time they were 13 or 14, for whatever reason. They just didn't enjoy it, weren't doing it for the right reasons, were either doing it just because they were good at it or because the parents said they wanted to do it, or but just hopefully try and foster however you're doing the sport or whatever you're doing, just make sure that you enjoy it. That's always what I've done, and probably one of the reasons why I've moved around a little bit. I've always kept, you've heard from a story that I've always kept active, but I've kind of chopped and changed with setting myself different goals and going to find different challenges to just make sure that interest and I keep fresh. And that's something that I've got to, because for me, competition is a big part of it. So I want something that's challenging, but also achievable. So that's why I've moved, from pentathlon, did a bit of running, did different events within running, moved back into multi-sports, doing triathlon, find something that you really enjoy and is going to challenge you. And it's not, that the ultimate target isn't, impossible to achieve. Don't say that you're going to compete, or win the Olympic gold medal when it's probably, chances are you might not. But don't also sell yourself short and just go down to the local village fete and win the 10K by 5 minutes. Set yourself something that is going to really challenge you. And I think I've kind of always sort of refreshed myself regularly by setting myself different challenges like that.
Yeah, cool. It's the journey, not the destination.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And enjoy it while you're on it.
Well, that's a great place to land it. Thank you ever so much.
No problem.
Great pleasure to have you on and listen to the story and the journey. And pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, so thank you ever so much for spending your time.
Yeah, and as I say, hopefully see you at some of the races this year once you're back after your injury. All right, cheers, Rich. See you soon.
All right, mate. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
So thanks again, Matt, for coming on the pod and sharing your journey into not one type of multi-sport, but two, and reaching world class in both of them. Quite a feat. And let's hope you can reach your goal and get that gold medal that you're striving for. And that's it for this episode. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you've been entertained. And if you'd like to get in touch, as usual, you can send us an email to agegroupmultisportpodcast@gmail.com. We're on Instagram at am_1967, so you can DM us if you'd like to come on the show and share your story. We're also on Facebook at AmpGB, and we're on Twitter at Age Group Multisport Podcast. We have our own YouTube channel where you can find all the previous podcasts, and that is YouTube at AmpGB. You can find all these podcasts on the usual platforms, but we have our own website, which is the Age Group Multisport Podcast.buzzsprout.com, and they're all on there also. So thank you very much. It would be much appreciated if you could leave us a like on Apple Podcast, and I think you can do that on Spotify now. A review would be even better, and a thumbs up, and subscribe as well, because all these things really do help to promote the podcast and get it out to a wider audience. So much appreciated. So until the next episode, stay safe, keep training, and love the process.